My mother didn't recognize me at first. She recognized my name. The trauma bay doors swung open, and the stretcher rolled in fast oxygen mask fogging, blood soaking through a torn blouse, monitors screaming. "Where is the attending?" my father demanded. "Who's in charge?" "I am," I said. I was already gloved, already moving. Then my mother looked up. Her eyes scanned my face like she was searching for something familiar. She didn't find it. But when her gaze dropped to the embroidery on my coat, Dr. Evelyn Whitaker, Chief of Trauma Surgery. She grabbed my father's arm so hard he winced. 5 years. 5 years since they blocked my number. 5 years since they told relatives I had failed out. 5 years since they missed my graduation, my wedding. And now their only daughter was bleeding out on my table. "BP is crashing," a nurse called. I didn't look at my parents again. "Move her to OR. Now." The doors shut between us. I stood over my sister unconscious, broken, vulnerable. I could save her. That part was easy. The harder question was this. After everything she did, what does a daughter owe the family that erased her? The name they erased. My mother didn't recognize me at first. She recognized my name. The trauma bay doors burst open at 2:17 a.m., and the stretcher came in fast, wheels rattling over tile, oxygen mask fogging with shallow breaths. Blood had soaked through my sister's blouse and pooled beneath her shoulder blades. The paramedic's voice was sharp and efficient. 34-year-old female, MVC, hypotensive, unresponsive, possible splenic rupture. I was already scrubbed in, already moving. "BP is 80 over palp," a nurse called. 2 units O negative, I said. "Prep or page anesthesia." Then I heard my father. "Where is the attending? I want the doctor in charge." His voice hadn't changed, still controlled, still used to being obeyed. "I am," I answered, without turning. I felt the silence before I saw it. My mother's breathing caught one small, broken sound. I looked up just long enough to see her staring at me like I was a stranger wearing someone else's face. Her eyes dropped. They landed on the embroidery stitched in navy thread over my heart. Dr. Evelyn Whitaker, MD. Chief of Trauma Surgery. Her hand shot out and grabbed my father's arm so hard his sleeve twisted under her grip. 5 years. 5 years since they blocked my number. 5 years since my sister Lauren told them I had failed out of medical school, that I couldn't handle the pressure, that I'd lied about everything. 5 years since they believed her without calling me once. "Move," I said to my team. The OR doors closed between us, sealing my parents on the other side of the glass. Inside, it was just monitors and breath and blood. Lauren looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before. For a moment, just a flicker, she wasn't the sister who dismantled my life. She was a patient, and I was her surgeon. If you've ever been erased by people who were supposed to know you best, you understand this kind of clarity. There's no screaming inside it, no drama, just a quiet decision. "Incision," I said. Because whatever she had done, whatever they had believed, there was still a human being on this table whose heart was struggling to keep up. I could save her. That part was never in question. The question waiting for me on the other side of those doors was whether I still wanted to be their daughter. 5 days. Blood has a way of simplifying things. Once the abdomen was open and the source confirmed a ruptured spleen, active bleed, everything else fell away. My hands moved the way they were trained to move. Clamp, suction, pack, assess. There's no room for history when someone is hemorrhaging. There's only sequence. But memory is patient. It waited until the bleeding slowed. It waited until anesthesia called out, pressure stabilizing. It waited until the worst of it was under control. And then it brought me back to another night. Another hospital room. Another phone call. 5 years ago, I was sitting on the linoleum floor of my apartment in Baltimore, still in scrubs, when my father's name lit up my screen. "Your sister told us everything," he said. "No greeting, no question. Everything. Lauren had told them I'd failed out of Hopkins, that I'd been placed on academic probation, that I'd spiraled after breaking up with a boyfriend who didn't exist. She showed us the messages, my mother added, voice shaking. Evelyn, how could you lie to us? I remember pressing my hand against the kitchen counter to steady myself. I didn't drop out, I said. I took a formal leave. It's documented. I can send you. We're not stupid, my father cut in. Don't insult us. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That's how long it took for them to decide who I was. Over the next 5 days, I called 14 times. Blocked. I sent 2 emails with official letters attached. No response. I mailed a handwritten letter. It came back unopened. My mother's handwriting across the envelope. Return to sender. 5 days. That's all it took to go from daughter to disgrace. Sponges, I said now, pulling myself back into the present. Lauren's vitals were steadier. The bleeding was contained. Outside these walls, my parents were sitting under fluorescent lights, probably holding hands the way they did when something frightened them. They used to hold my hands like that once. If you've ever tried to prove your innocence to someone who's already decided you're guilty, you know this feeling. It isn't rage. It's exhaustion. Prepare to close, I instructed. I didn't rush. I repaired what could be repaired. Carefully, methodically. Because here's the truth I learned in those 5 days. You cannot force someone to see you. You can only decide whether you will still see yourself. And tonight, in this operating room, I knew exactly who I was. The leave that became a lie. I didn't take a leave because I was failing. I took a leave because someone I loved was dying. Her name was Maya Bennett. And she had been my roommate since first year. Brilliant, stubborn, the kind of woman who color-coded her anatomy notes and still found time to bring coffee to the night nurse during finals week. When she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in the middle of our 3rd year, there was no family to step in, no parents flying in from somewhere warm and stable. It was just me. I went to the dean the next morning with paperwork in my shaking hands. Caregiver leave. 1 semester. Approved, signed, sealed. My seat would be waiting in January. Everything documented. Everything legitimate. I called Lauren that afternoon because I still believed sisters were supposed to know things like this. I told her about Maya's chemo schedule, about sleeping in a hospital chair, about how scared I was of watching someone my age fade. Lauren's voice softened in that syrupy way she used when she wanted to sound kind. Don't tell Mom and Dad yet, she said. They'll just panic. Let me handle it. I didn't realize I was handing her a match. 3 days later, my parents called. Already convinced. Lauren had told them I was using a fake medical crisis to cover academic probation. She said she'd seen emails from the administration threatening dismissal. She said I was too ashamed to admit I couldn't keep up. She told them I was spiraling. The precision of it still amazes me. She didn't invent chaos. She rearranged truth just enough to make it unrecognizable. Yes, I was on leave, but she turned compassion into incompetence. Yes, I was exhausted, but she framed it as collapse. By the time I tried to explain, they were listening through the filter she had installed. My father kept repeating, "Hopkins doesn't just lose students like this," my mother whispered. "We raised you better than this." I was standing in an oncology hallway that smelled like antiseptic and overbrewed coffee, staring at a poster about hope while my own parents rewrote my life in real time. If you've ever watched someone distort your truth so convincingly that even you start to question it, you know the dizziness of that moment. I remember looking down at the official letter on my phone, the dean's signature clear as day, and thinking, why isn't this enough? But lies, when spoken confidently, often feel cleaner than complicated truths. And Lauren had always been the cleaner storyteller. By the time Maya squeezed my hand from her hospital bed and asked who was on the phone, I couldn't even say, "My parents." Not anymore. In their version of events, I had already left medical school. In their version, I was already gone. The silence after. The strangest part wasn't the accusation, It was what came after. Silence can be louder than any argument, and once my parents decided the story Lauren handed them was easier than the one I was living, they chose quiet. Not reflective quiet. Not confused quiet. Deliberate quiet. On the 6th day, after 14 blocked calls, 2 unanswered emails, and 1 returned letter, I stopped reaching out not because I agreed with them, but because I finally understood that I was speaking into a wall they had willingly built. Maya's chemo made her skin translucent, veins like pale blue maps beneath the surface. I would sit beside her hospital bed at 3 in the morning, listening to the steady rhythm of machines, and think about how grief and rejection can occupy the same body without canceling each other out. I was losing my best friend slowly, cell by cell, while simultaneously being erased from my own family in one clean cut. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match, no moment where someone said, "Wait, let's double check." There was only absence. My father's number no longer rang. My mother's voice went straight to automated voicemail. Lauren sent one text. "I'm sorry it came out like this." That was it. Not "I'm sorry I lied." Not "I'm sorry I hurt you." Just "I'm sorry it came out." As if the damage were an unfortunate weather event. As if the problem were exposure, not deception. If you've ever been shut out without closure, you know how your mind tries to negotiate. Maybe if I explain it differently. Maybe if I show more proof. Maybe if I apologize for something I didn't do. I drafted messages I never sent. I rehearsed conversations that would never happen. Meanwhile, life did not pause. Maya needed help to the bathroom. She needed someone to advocate when the pain medication was delayed. She needed someone to sit beside her when the fear crept in at dusk and the hospital lights dimmed. So I poured myself into what was tangible. I learned the exact way she liked her water ice, but not too much. I memorized the rhythm of her breathing so I could tell when the pain was about to spike before she even spoke. In losing my parents, I discovered something unexpected. My capacity to stay. Even when staying hurt. Even when no one was clapping for it. Even when the people who raised me had decided I was a disappointment. And in that sterile room, under humming fluorescent lights, I began to understand that being cut off did not mean I had to cut myself down. The day she died. Maya died on a Sunday morning in December, and the light coming through the hospice window was almost offensively soft. Snow had fallen overnight, muting the world outside into something that looked peaceful, which felt like a betrayal. There is nothing peaceful about watching someone your age stop breathing. There's a moment right before the monitors flatten when the room feels suspended, like even time is holding its breath. I was the only one there. I held her hand. I counted the seconds between each inhale without meaning to. When the last one came, it was smaller than the others. Almost polite. And then there was only the steady, unbroken tone of absence. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Lauren. The one time I had tried to share something fragile, it had been weaponized. Grief needs safe ground, and I had learned the hard way where not to place it. I organized the funeral myself. 6 people came. A former foster sister drove in from Pennsylvania. 2 classmates stood in the back, unsure where to put their hands. A nurse from oncology cried openly in the second row. I stood at a podium in a chapel built for 60 and read the eulogy. Maya had once joked she'd edit herself if given the chance. My voice didn't crack. I think I had cried everything out weeks earlier on a hospital floor while my parents decided I was a liar. That night, I went back to the apartment we had shared. Her coffee mug was still in the sink. A yellow sticky note was tucked into her copy of Grey's Anatomy. Her handwriting, shaky but deliberate. Finish what you started. Don't let anyone tell you who you are. I sat on the kitchen tile and read it 3 times. Grief rearranges you. It strips away what you thought you needed and leaves you with what's essential. I realized something sitting there in that too quiet apartment. The people who walked away from me did not get to decide the meaning of my life. If you've ever lost someone who believed in you more fiercely than you believed in yourself, you know how their faith lingers. It doesn't vanish with them. It settles into your spine. The next morning, I reopened my re-enrollment application. My hands were steadier than they had been in weeks, not because I wasn't hurting, but because I understood that quitting would not bring my family back, and it would not honor Maya either. Some choices are made in anger. This one was made in clarity. I chose to go back. Not to prove my sister wrong. Not to beg my parents for validation. I chose to go back because I knew exactly who I was when everything else fell away. Going back, returning to medical school felt less like a triumphant comeback and more like slipping quietly into a seat no one had warmed for me. January air in Baltimore cut straight through my coat the first morning I walked back onto campus. Students hurried past with coffee cups and backpacks, complaining about exams, unaware that I had just buried my best friend and been quietly disowned by my family in the span of 4 months. The registrar nodded when I checked in, polite and neutral, as if nothing seismic had happened. On paper, nothing had. My leave was documented. My position secure. Institutions respond to paperwork, not heartbreak. I remember standing outside the lecture hall before my first class back, hand on the door, feeling the weight of how alone I truly was. No emergency contact who would answer. No parent who would pick up if something went wrong. Just me. If you've ever walked into a room knowing the only safety net beneath you is your own resolve, you understand that particular kind of steadiness. It's not confidence. It's necessity. I worked more than I ever had. I picked up research assistant hours in the evenings. Not because I was chasing prestige, but because I needed the extra loan cushion. I ate cafeteria leftovers between rotations. I studied in hospital stairwells during night shifts. Grief became something I folded neatly into the margins of my planner. Page by page, test by test, I rebuilt the life my sister had declared over. Occasionally, the silence from home would echo unexpectedly, usually on holidays. Thanksgiving arrived without a single text. Christmas passed with no voicemail. I stopped checking my phone for Hartford area codes. There is a moment when hope turns into acceptance, and it is strangely peaceful. Not happy, just clean. During one surgical rotation, a senior attending let me close a complex abdominal case. My hands were steady. He nodded once and said, "You're going to be very good at this." It wasn't effusive praise, it was matter of fact. And for the first time in a long while, I felt seen by someone who had nothing to gain from seeing me. I graduated on time. My name was called. Applause filled the auditorium. My classmates' families stood with cameras and flowers. My seat in the guest section remained empty. I told myself I didn't care. But afterward, when I stepped outside in my cap and gown and realized there was no one looking for me in the crowd, I felt the absence like a physical thing. Then my mentor, Dr. Kaplan, placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "We're proud of you. Sometimes the family that shows up is the one you didn't grow up with. And sometimes that has to be enough." The wedding without them. I got married on a Saturday in October, under a maple tree that had just started turning red at the edges. It wasn't a cathedral or a ballroom. It was my mentor, Dr. Kaplan's backyard string lights woven through branches, folding chairs set up in uneven rows, a long wooden table where someone had placed mason jars filled with white flowers. It was simple, intentional. Ours. His name is Daniel Reyes. He's a civil rights attorney with the calmest eyes I've ever seen. The first time I told him the full story, every blocked call, every returned letter, every rumor my sister spread, he didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He just said, "You deserved better." 4 words. No drama, just truth. When we sent out invitations, I addressed one to my parents anyway. Not because I expected them to come, but because some part of me needed to know I hadn't been the one to close the door. 3 weeks later, the envelope came back. Unopened. My mother's handwriting in the corner. Return to sender. I stared at it for a long time before placing it in a drawer. Not hidden, just kept. On the day of the wedding, I stood in the small bedroom upstairs while Daniel's father adjusted his tie downstairs. I had asked him, this quiet, kind man who had shown up to every law school, graduation, and birthday dinner, to walk me down the aisle. He didn't hesitate. When he offered me his arm that afternoon, he squeezed my hand once and whispered, "It's an honor." If you've ever had someone choose you without obligation, you know how healing that feels. We walked toward the tree together. Guests turned. Music played softly from a borrowed speaker. I didn't scan the crowd for my parents. I had already done that enough times in my life. Instead, I focused on Daniel waiting at the front, steady and certain. During the vows, my voice didn't shake. Not because I wasn't aware of who wasn't there, but because I understood that love isn't measured by attendance, it's measured by presence. Afterward, there was laughter and cake, and someone spilled champagne on the grass. Dr. Kaplan toasted us. My best friend from residency cried openly. Daniel's mother hugged me like she'd known me forever. And when the sun dipped low and the lights came on overhead, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure. Not forgiveness. Something steadier. I had built a life without them, brick by brick. And as I stood there in borrowed heels and a white dress that smelled faintly of autumn leaves, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living. 5 years quiet. 5 years is long enough to build a life and short enough for the ache to still surprise you. I matched into a surgical residency back on the East Coast, at a Level I trauma center just 40 minutes from the town where I grew up. Close enough to smell the same winter air. Far enough to avoid the grocery stores where someone might recognize my last name. Residency does not care about your personal history. It does not slow down because your parents decided you were a disappointment. It demands your hands, your focus, your stamina. 12-hour shifts became 16. I learned how to operate on 2 hours of sleep and black coffee. I learned the sound a ruptured artery makes before you even see it. I learned how to deliver terrible news to strangers with steady eyes. What I did not learn, at least not right away, was how to stop wondering whether my mother ever thought about me when she passed the empty bedroom at the end of the hall. Aunt Caroline, my father's younger sister, called me every few months. She was the only thread still connecting me to that version of my life. She would update me carefully, like someone handling fragile glass. Your dad's plant had layoffs. Your mom started gardening again. Lauren's working in medical device sales now. I never asked questions. I listened. That was enough. Occasionally, Caroline would say, "You know, they still think you left school. Not with accusation, just with quiet disbelief." I stopped trying to correct the narrative. If 5 days of proof hadn't changed their minds, 5 years wouldn't either. If you've ever been misrepresented in a room you're not in, you understand the helplessness of it. People build versions of you that live independent lives. They tell stories. They nod sympathetically. They move on. Meanwhile, you're scrubbing in for surgery, at 3 in the morning, saving someone else's daughter. I became chief resident in my 5th year. The promotion came with a small office and a heavier pager. I bought a modest house with a porch that catches the morning light. Daniel planted herbs in the backyard. We adopted a golden retriever who sheds relentlessly and believes every problem can be solved with loyalty. On paper, my life was full. And it was. But there is a particular kind of emptiness that sits between your ribs when the people who raised you don't know who you've become. I stopped waiting for them to find out. I stopped rehearsing imaginary reunions. I focused on the present tense. Because peace, I learned, isn't the absence of hurt. It's the decision not to let that hurt dictate your future. The inquiry. The first time I realized the lie hadn't died, it wasn't because of my parents. It was because of an email from Human Resources. I was in my 3rd year of residency, halfway through a trauma rotation, when the program director asked to see me. His tone was neutral. Too neutral. "Have you had any issues with credential verification?" he asked. "No," I said. "Why?" He slid a printed email across the desk. An anonymous inquiry. Someone claiming to be a concerned relative had requested confirmation that I had legitimately completed medical school. They wanted to know if I had ever been placed on academic probation. They hinted at fabricated documentation. My stomach didn't drop. It settled. Heavy. Predictable. The IP address had been traced. Hartford. My hometown. Lauren hadn't just told one lie 5 years ago. She had maintained it. Carefully. Quietly. Methodically. I remember walking out of that office and into the stairwell because I needed walls around me. Concrete felt safer than open air. If you've ever discovered that someone isn't just misunderstanding you but actively working to keep you diminished, you know that particular chill. It isn't explosive. It's clarifying. The hospital handled it quickly. My records were immaculate. The inquiry was dismissed as malicious. But the intent lingered. That night, I told Daniel. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the dog asleep under his chair, the porch light glowing softly outside. "She's still trying," I said. Daniel didn't look surprised. He rarely does. "That's not sibling rivalry," he said gently. "That's control." Lauren had built an entire narrative around me failing, around me unraveling. If I succeeded openly, it threatened the architecture she'd constructed. So she probed, looking for cracks, looking for proof that she had been right all along. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront her. Not because I was afraid. Because I was tired. There is a point when defending yourself becomes another form of attachment. I refused to let her obsession define my direction. So I kept working. I became chief resident that year. I earned the respect of surgeons who valued precision over gossip. I built credibility that didn't require family endorsement. And somewhere in that process, something shifted inside me. I stopped hoping the truth would rescue me. I started understanding that the truth doesn't need to shout. It waits. And eventually, it stands under fluorescent lights with your name stitched across your chest. The night my pager went off at 2:17 a.m., I had no idea that waiting was over. I only knew there was a trauma incoming. Female. Mid-30s. Severe abdominal bleeding. I didn't know it was my sister. Not yet. Recognition. The moment I saw her name on the intake screen, something inside me went very still. Not shattered. Not frantic. Still. Evelyn Whitaker. 34. MVC. Hypotensive. My thumb hovered over the tablet for half a second longer than necessary, and then training took over. Mechanism of injury. Estimated blood loss. Possible splenic rupture. I walked toward the trauma bay with the same measured pace I would have used for anyone else, because in that hallway I was not a sister. I was the chief of trauma surgery. The ambulance doors burst open and the stretcher rolled in hard. Blood streaked across her collarbone. One arm hung unnaturally loose. My team rattled off numbers while I assessed airway, breathing, circulation. Efficient, detached. "Prep for OR," I said. Only then did I register the movement in the waiting area beyond the glass. My parents were there, disoriented, terrified, smaller than I remembered. My father kept running a hand through his graying hair. My mother was clutching her purse like it could anchor her. For 5 years they had believed I was unstable, unqualified, a cautionary tale whispered at holidays. And now the hospital staff was looking to me for direction. I stepped fully into view to sign the surgical consent override. My mother's eyes lifted. They passed over my face in confusion before dropping to the lettering on my coat. I watched recognition arrive slowly, like a sunrise she hadn't prepared for. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She grabbed my father's arm so hard he flinched. "That's her," she whispered, and I wasn't sure if she meant Lauren or me. For a brief second, I wondered what story was rearranging itself in their heads. The daughter who failed. The daughter who left. The daughter who never called. Standing 10 feet away in navy scrubs, holding authority they had insisted I'd lost. If you've ever watched someone confront evidence that dismantles a belief they defended for years, you know how fragile that moment is. It doesn't explode. It fractures quietly. I didn't approach them. I didn't explain. There would be time for words later, or there wouldn't. Let's move, I told my team. The doors closed between us with a soft hydraulic seal. On the other side of that glass were 5 years of silence. On this side was a body losing blood. And whatever my sister had done, whatever my parents had chosen, I was about to decide whether she lived. Under the lights. The operating room is the only place where my past doesn't get a vote. Under those lights, there is no childhood hierarchy, no favorite daughter, no whispered version of who I am supposed to be. There is only anatomy, tissue, time. Lauren's blood pressure was dropping fast by the time we made the first incision. Suction, I said. Steady. Even. My voice did not tremble. My hands did not hesitate. The rupture was exactly where I expected it to be, splenic, messy, urgent. Blood pooled dark and fast. For a fleeting second, I felt something dangerously close to anger rise in my chest. Not because she was hurt. Because she was here. Because fate had chosen this particular collision point between us. I pushed the feeling aside. Surgery does not tolerate emotion. Clamp. Pack. Assess. We're losing her, one of the residents murmured. No, we're not, I replied, already isolating the vessel. Years of training condensed into instinct. This is what I had built my life around after they decided I had none. This is what they had believed I failed. If you've ever been underestimated so completely that your success feels surreal even to you, you know the clarity that follows. I wasn't performing for them. I wasn't proving anything. I was doing my job. The bleeding slowed. Once the spleen was controlled, we moved to assess secondary injuries. Liver laceration. Manageable. No bowel perforation. I worked methodically, narrating just enough for the residents to follow. My world narrowed to the rhythm of suction and the quiet hum of monitors. Outside those walls, my parents were likely replaying every conversation they'd had about me over the last 5 years. Inside, there was no room for that. Only the present tense. After nearly 3 hours, her vitals stabilized. The crisis passed in increments, not triumph. I placed the final sutures with the same care I would offer any patient. No more. No less. When I finally stepped back and removed my gloves, there was no surge of victory. Just a steady exhale. She was alive. Because I chose to keep her that way. Not because she deserved it more than anyone else. Not because we shared blood. Because my oath required it. And because the kind of person I have fought to become does not let resentment hold the scalpel. I washed my hands slowly, watching diluted red spiral down the drain. On the other side of those doors, 5 years of silence were waiting to speak. The waiting room. Walking into the waiting room felt harder than the surgery. In the operating room, I knew exactly who I was. Out here, the air was heavier. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A television in the corner played a muted morning news segment no one was watching. My parents stood the moment I stepped through the double doors. My father first. Out of habit. My mother followed, eyes swollen, hands trembling. For a split second, we simply stared at one another. 5 years of absence compressed into a narrow hospital corridor. I kept my voice clinical, steady. Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker. I began, and I saw the words land. Not Mom. Not Dad. Your daughter sustained a ruptured spleen and a liver laceration. Surgery was successful. She's stable and in recovery. My mother let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. My father's jaw tightened as he processed the information. Then his gaze dropped again to my coat, as if confirming I was real. You're the chief? He asked. His voice unfamiliar to me now. Softer. Yes, I said simply. Silence settled between us. Not the hostile kind from 5 years ago. This one felt fragile, like thin glass. My mother took a tentative step forward. "Evelyn," she whispered, as though testing whether my name would hold. I did not step closer. I did not step back. "I sent you the paperwork," I said, not accusatory, just factual. The leave approval. The dean's contact. The graduation notice. My father's face drained of color. "Lauren told us," he started, then stopped. Because whatever he had been about to repeat no longer fit the evidence standing in front of him. If you've ever watched someone's certainty unravel in real time, you know it doesn't happen loudly. It happens in small fractures. My mother pressed her fingers to her mouth. "We thought you left," she said. "We thought you didn't want us anymore." The irony almost made me smile, but I was too tired for that. "I called 14 times, I replied gently. "You blocked my number." The truth did not need volume. It hung there on its own. My father looked at the floor. For the first time in my life, he did not have a correction. No lecture, no directive. Just quiet. A nurse approached to update me on Lauren's vitals. I nodded, grateful for the interruption. "She'll be in ICU for monitoring," I added. "You can see her shortly." I turned to leave, but my mother's voice stopped me. "Evelyn, we didn't know." I paused. Not out of obligation, out of clarity. "You could have," I said softly. And then I walked back toward the corridor, leaving them standing in the space where belief and truth had finally collided. ICU. The ICU is quieter than the trauma bay, but it holds a different kind of tension, the slow, deliberate kind that lingers after survival. When I walked into Lauren's room, the morning light was just beginning to filter through the blinds. Machines hummed softly. A ventilator assisted her breathing in steady intervals. She looked smaller somehow. Stripped of presentation. No carefully managed expression. No curated version of herself. Just a body stitched back together. My parents stood on either side of the bed. My mother was gripping the rail as if Lauren might float away. My father turned when I entered, uncertainty replacing the authority he once carried so easily. "She's stable," I said, checking the monitors without looking directly at them. "The next 24 hours are important, but the surgery went well." My mother nodded quickly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You saved her," she whispered. The words felt heavy in the room. I adjusted an IV line before answering. I did my job. That was the truth. Not deflection, not humility, just alignment. Lauren's eyelids fluttered then. Faint but unmistakable. She was surfacing. I stepped closer, assessing pupil response. "Lauren," I said calmly, "you're in the ICU. You were in an accident. Surgery was successful." Her gaze drifted toward the sound of my voice. It took a second for recognition to register. Then her eyes sharpened slightly, focusing on my face. Confusion flickered. Then something else. Not gratitude, not relief. Calculation. Even groggy, even medicated, she was trying to understand the new landscape. "Evelyn?" she rasped around the ventilator tube. I nodded once. Professional. Neutral. My parents stiffened behind me, as though waiting for an eruption. There wasn't one. "You're going to be okay," I said. "Rest." If you've ever had to stand steady in front of someone who destabilized you for years, you know the strength it takes not to collapse into old roles. I wasn't the younger sister anymore. I wasn't the girl pleading to be heard. I was the attending physician, managing a post-operative patient. The hierarchy had shifted, and everyone in that room could feel it. Lauren's fingers twitched weakly against the blanket. Her eyes held mine for a moment longer, searching for something: anger, accusation, triumph. I gave her none of it. I checked her chart, confirmed orders with the nurse, and stepped back. "I'll return later to reassess," I told my parents. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother reached out slightly, but didn't touch me. Boundaries had materialized without being spoken, As I exited the ICU, I realized something quietly profound. Saving her life had not reopened old wounds. It had clarified them. And clarity is a form of power no lie can withstand. What they didn't check. I didn't expect an apology in the ICU. Hospitals are strange equalizers. They strip away pride, but they don't automatically produce honesty. When I returned that afternoon, Lauren was breathing on her own. Pale, stitched, exhausted but conscious. My parents were still there. They looked like people who hadn't slept, or maybe like people who had just woken up for the first time in 5 years. My father stood when I entered the room. It used to be a gesture of authority. Now it felt uncertain. "Evelyn," he said, and even hearing my name in his voice felt unfamiliar. "We need to talk." "Not here," I replied calmly. "She needs rest." Lauren shifted slightly in the bed, wincing. Her eyes flicked between us, watching, measuring. "I never meant for it to go this far," she murmured weakly. "There it was. Not I lied. Not I hurt you. Just distance from consequence." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Lauren," she whispered. "Did you tell us she failed out?" Silence. A machine beeped steadily beside the bed. Lauren swallowed. "I thought she was overwhelmed," she said. "I thought she was hiding it." "You told us she was dismissed," my father said, his voice thinning. "You showed us emails." Lauren's gaze slid away. "I was trying to protect you." Protect. It's a dangerous word when misused. It makes manipulation sound noble. I stepped closer, not to her, but to the foot of the bed, anchored, steady. "You could have called the dean," I said to my parents. Gently. His number was in the email I sent. My mother looked like the air had been knocked from her lungs. "You sent proof?" she asked. "Yes." My father closed his eyes briefly, the smallest fracture in a man who had never admitted error easily. "If you've ever realized that someone didn't just lie about you but that others chose not to verify, you know the second wound cuts deeper than the first." Lauren's voice sharpened slightly despite the pain medication. "You always make everything sound so clean," she said to me. "Like you're the victim." "I'm not interested in being the victim," I answered quietly. "I'm interested in being accurate." Ah. The room stilled. Accuracy leaves very little room for performance. My mother sat down slowly in the chair beside the bed, as though her knees could no longer support the weight of realization. For 5 years, they had repeated a story. At holidays. To relatives. To neighbors. They hadn't checked. They hadn't asked. They hadn't wanted to. And now the daughter they thought had failed was standing in scrubs, monitoring the daughter who had lied. No shouting. No dramatic collapse. Just truth, and the kind of silence that follows when it finally settles in. The evidence. It wasn't me who broke the last piece of it open. It was my Aunt Caroline. She arrived just before noon, still in her wool coat, hair slightly windblown, eyes sharper than I had seen them in years. She didn't hug anyone. She didn't ask for updates. She walked straight into Lauren's ICU room like a woman who had waited long enough. "I brought something," she said quietly, pulling her phone from her purse. My parents looked at her, confused. Lauren's jaw tightened. Caroline turned the screen toward them first. "These are the emails Evelyn sent you 5 years ago." My mother reached for the phone with trembling hands. There they were, timestamps, attachments, the official leave approval letter with the university seal, the dean's contact information clearly listed. Caroline scrolled. "Here's the PDF of her re-enrollment confirmation. Here's a photo from her graduation. I was there." She paused, then swiped again. "And here's a text from Lauren to me 4 years ago." She read it aloud. "Don't tell Mom and Dad about Evelyn finishing residency. It'll just upset them again." The air in the room shifted, dense and undeniable. My father's face drained of color. My mother lowered herself into the chair slowly, as though her legs had given out. Lauren stared at the ceiling, eyes glassy but alert. No more performance. No more reframing. just exposure. If you've ever watched a carefully constructed lie collapse under documentation, you know it doesn't explode, it disintegrates. Piece by piece. Quietly, my father cleared his throat, but nothing came out. He looked at Lauren, then at me, then back at the floor. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice rough. Lauren swallowed. For a moment, I thought she might pivot again, but there was nowhere left to turn. "Yes," she whispered. One word. 5 years too late. My mother made a sound I had never heard before, low, wounded, not dramatic but deeply human. Caroline slipped the phone back into her purse. "You didn't lose a daughter," she said gently to my parents. "You let one go because believing the easier story felt safer." No one argued. There was nothing left to defend. I stood near the doorway, not triumphant, not vindicated, just steady. Truth had entered the room without me forcing it. And for the first time since that 4-minute phone call 5 years ago, I wasn't the one explaining. I wasn't the one begging to be believed. The evidence spoke for itself. What regret sounds like. Regret does not arrive dramatically. It doesn't fall to its knees or raise its voice. It settles into a room like dust, visible only when the light hits it just right. That afternoon, after Caroline left and Lauren drifted back into medicated sleep, my parents asked me to step into the hallway. The ICU doors closed softly behind us. For a moment, none of us spoke. My father leaned against the wall as though he needed it to hold him up. My mother clasped her hands together, knuckles white. "We were wrong," she said finally. Not defensive. Not qualified. Just plain. The simplicity of it almost startled me. 5 years ago, they had needed certainty. Now they were standing in uncertainty, with no script to guide them. "Why didn't you call the school?" I asked quietly. It wasn't an accusation. I genuinely wanted to understand. My father swallowed hard. "Because Lauren had proof," he said. "And because I didn't want to believe you would lie, but I also didn't want to believe she would." There it was. The conflict they had chosen to resolve by sacrificing the quieter daughter. My mother's voice trembled. "It felt easier to think you were pushing us away than to think your sister was hurting you. If you've ever realized you were the easier loss, you know how that lands. It doesn't shatter you if you've already rebuilt yourself, but it does explain a lifetime of smaller moments." "You blocked my number," I said. My father closed his eyes briefly. "I know." 2 words. Heavy. I watched them carefully, not for tears, but for accountability. "We repeated it," my mother continued. "To family. To friends. We told people you couldn't handle the pressure." She exhaled shakily. "I am so ashamed. Shame is different from regret. Shame focuses inward. Regret looks outward." I needed the latter. "What happens now?" my father asked. For the first time, he wasn't instructing. He was asking permission. I took a slow breath. "Now," I said evenly, "you decide whether you're willing to repair what you helped break." Repair is not emotional, it is structural. It requires action, not sentiment. "We'll do whatever it takes," my mother said quickly. I held her gaze. "Then it starts with truth. Publicly. To everyone who heard the lie." My father nodded slowly. Not eagerly, not proudly, but intentionally. And in that hallway, beneath the low hum of hospital lights, I realized something steady and clear. I no longer needed their apology to feel whole. But if they wanted to be part of my life again, they would have to earn their place in it. Conditions. I didn't go back into Lauren's room that evening. Not because I was avoiding her, but because clarity requires space. After my shift ended, I drove home in silence. The road lights blurred slightly against the windshield, and for the first time all day, my hands weren't holding anything together. Daniel was waiting at the kitchen table when I walked in. He didn't ask questions immediately. He just stood, wrapped his arms around me, and let me breathe. If you've ever had someone anchor you without demanding explanation, you know how rare that is. They know, I said finally. He nodded once. And now they want to fix it. The word fix lingered between us. Families love that word. It sounds efficient, quick, surgical, but repair is rarely clean. The next morning, I asked my parents to meet me in a small consultation room at the hospital. Neutral ground. No childhood memories attached to the walls. They arrived early. My father stood when I entered. My mother looked like she hadn't slept. I remained standing. Not out of defiance. Out of steadiness. If we're going to move forward, I began. There are conditions. My father nodded immediately. My mother clasped her purse tighter. First, I said, Lauren sends a written correction to every family member who heard the lie. Not vague, not emotional, specific. My mother nodded quickly. My father swallowed but didn't object. Second, you both correct it yourselves. Conversations, phone calls, however long it takes. I paused, letting that settle. Third, you attend family counseling. Not to convince me of anything, to understand why verifying the truth felt less important than protecting the story. My father stiffened at that. Therapy had never been something he believed in. I held his gaze evenly. I am not rebuilding on the same foundation, I said calmly. Silence stretched. Then, slowly, he nodded. We'll go, he said. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. If you've ever had to set boundaries with people who once had absolute authority over you, you know how steady you have to stand. Not angry, not cruel. Clear. My mother's eyes filled. Are we forgiven? She asked softly. I didn't answer immediately. Forgiveness is not a door you fling open. It's something you grow into. I'm willing to see what consistent effort looks like, I replied. That was the most honest thing I could offer. As I left the room, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't negotiating from a place of hurt anymore. I was negotiating from strength, and that changes everything. The email. Lauren was discharged 2 weeks later with a scar that would take months to fade and a silence that felt unfamiliar on her. She asked to meet before sending the email. We chose a quiet coffee shop halfway between her apartment and my house. Neutral territory. No hospital monitors, no family spectators. She looked thinner. Not just from surgery, but from the weight of something she could no longer redirect. For the first few minutes, we spoke about practical things, follow-up appointments, physical therapy, medication schedules. It was almost polite. Then she folded her hands together and said, I drafted it. Her voice didn't wobble. It didn't perform. She slid her phone across the table. I read it slowly. 3 paragraphs. Direct. No euphemisms. She admitted she lied about my leaving medical school. She admitted fabricating evidence. She admitted maintaining the deception for 5 years and discouraging anyone who tried to question it. The final sentence read, Evelyn never abandoned this family. I created a story that made you believe she did. I looked up. No justification? I asked quietly. She shook her head. There isn't one. If you've ever waited years to hear someone name the harm they caused without adding a footnote to protect themselves, you know how disorienting that can feel. It doesn't erase the damage, but it does change the temperature of the room. Send it, I said. She hesitated only once, then pressed the button. 47 recipients. A lifetime of holiday tables and shared history receiving the truth at the same time. We sat there in silence after it was done. Outside, someone laughed as they passed the window. Inside, something shifted that neither of us tried to define. My phone buzzed within minutes. An aunt. Then a cousin. Then another. Confusion. Shock. Some anger. Some quiet apologies directed at me. I didn't respond right away. I let it move through the family without my management. This wasn't about public vindication. It was about restoring accuracy. Lauren stared into her untouched coffee. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said finally. I studied her for a long moment. The sister who had once curated every perception now looked almost transparent. Forgiveness isn't the first step, I replied gently. Consistency is. She nodded. No argument. No performance. Just acceptance. And as we left the cafe separately, I realized something steady and unexpected. The truth had finally been spoken aloud without me forcing it. And that mattered more than applause ever could. Counseling. My parents started therapy the following month. I didn't attend the first sessions. That wasn't my work to do. Repairing what they chose required them to examine why they chose it. They found a therapist in West Hartford, Dr. Miller. Calm voice, steady gaze, the kind of woman who lets silence stretch until someone fills it with honesty instead of defensiveness. My mother adapted first. She always had more emotional vocabulary than my father. She had just used it selectively. During one session, she admitted something that Caroline later repeated to me gently over the phone. It was easier to believe Evelyn was struggling than to believe Lauren was manipulating us. Easier. That word again. If you've ever been the child who didn't cause scenes, you know how often easier gets assigned to you. My father struggled more visibly. Therapy challenged his certainty, and certainty had always been his armor. He told Dr. Miller he had trusted Lauren because she sounded confident, because she brought proof, because admitting he might have misjudged the situation felt like admitting weakness. When Dr. Miller asked him why he never called the medical school to verify, he didn't have an answer that satisfied even himself. Pride, it turned out, had been part of the architecture, not cruelty, not indifference. Pride. The unwillingness to revisit a decision once declared. I met them for coffee after their third session. Not at the house I grew up in. Not at mine. Neutral ground again. My mother looked tired in a different way, like someone excavating old foundations. My father seemed quieter, less rigid. We should have checked, he said plainly. No defense attached. I nodded. Yes, I replied. We talked about small things after that. The dog. The garden. Weather. It wasn't profound. But it wasn't brittle either. If you've ever attempted to rebuild trust with people who once dismissed you, you know progress doesn't feel dramatic. It feels incremental. Measured. My mother mailed me another letter 2 weeks later. In it, she wrote, I see now how often I chose peace over fairness. That line stayed with me. Peace over fairness. It explained more than just 5 years of silence. It explained a childhood pattern I had learned to survive. I placed her letter in the same drawer as the returned wedding invitation and Maya's sticky note. Not as a replacement. As evidence of movement. My father began calling once a week. Short conversations at first. Practical. Then gradually more personal. He asked about surgeries. About research. About Daniel. The first time he said, I'm proud of you. His voice sounded unfamiliar. Like a language he was still learning. I didn't rush to fill the gap. I let it exist. Because reconciliation isn't about erasing what happened, it's about acknowledging it and choosing not to repeat it. And for the first time in years, I believed that repetition was no longer inevitable. 4 plates. It was snowing the morning they came over for breakfast, not the dramatic kind. Just a quiet February dusting that softened the edges of the neighborhood and made everything look briefly gentler than it really was. Daniel was at the stove, flipping pancakes. Our golden retriever was stationed beneath the table, hopeful as always. When the doorbell rang, I knew who it was before I opened it. My parents stood on the porch holding a bottle of orange juice and a tin of homemade shortbread. My mother used to bake those for Lauren's school events. She had never baked them for mine. Hi, she said carefully. Hi, I answered. I stepped aside. They entered slowly, like guests unsure if they were welcome. My father looked around the kitchen at the framed residency photo on the wall. At Daniel, moving comfortably through the space. At the dog weaving between legs. He wasn't inspecting. He was orienting himself. "Can I help?" he asked. The question was small. Unfamiliar. "You can set the table," I said. He nodded and opened the cabinet I pointed to. He counted the plates quietly in his hands. 1, 2, 3. He hesitated. Then looked at me. 4. 4. I confirmed. If you've ever rebuilt something after it broke, you know the first steps aren't grand gestures. They're practical, measured, almost ordinary. We sat down together. Conversation moved carefully at first: weather, the drive, how Lauren's physical therapy was going. There was no dramatic apology replayed. No rehashing of blame. Just presence. At one point, my mother reached across the table and rested her hand over mine. Not gripping, not pleading, just resting. "I'm glad you let us come," she said quietly. "I'm glad you came," I replied. And I meant it. Not because the past disappeared. Not because the scar between us vanished. But because they were here without rewriting anything, without minimizing anything, without pretending the 5 years hadn't happened. After breakfast, my father lingered near the doorway. "I don't expect this to be easy," he said, "but I'd like to keep showing up." "Then keep showing up," I answered. "That's the thing about boundaries. They aren't walls. They're doors with hinges you control." As they drove away, Daniel slipped his hand into mine. The dog pressed against my leg. Snow continued falling in soft, patient flakes. 5 years ago, I lost my family in a 4-minute phone call. I didn't get revenge. I didn't win. I built a life. And when the truth finally walked back to my door, I was strong enough to decide how wide to open it. If this story feels familiar in any way, you're not wrong for protecting your peace. And if you're listening from somewhere far away tonight, I'd love to know where. Healing can feel lonely, but it doesn't have to be. 4 plates. It's a start.